April Collins has one of the craziest gangland stories in modern Irish crime. At just 15, she was already dating into Limerick's most feared crime family, the Dundons. By her 20s, she'd flipped on them. Not just any informant, she helped jail the same men she once called family. But turning witness didn't mean escaping gangland. Years later, she married Thomas O'Neill, a convicted rapist with a long record of violence. And instead of finding peace, April found herself dragged into another feud as her husband pursued a career in low-level drug dealing. Now 37, she's still living in the shadow of that world. More than a decade after she took the stand in court, she's still looking over her shoulder. April Collins was born in 1987 and raised in a tough working-class district on Limerick's south side. The Collins family was well known locally, and not always for the right reasons. April's father, Jimmy Collins, was himself an established figure in the city's underworld, a man with gangland clout. In the early 2000s, Limerick was in the grip of a bitter feud between two criminal alliances, the McCarthy-Dundon gang, to which the Collins family was connected, and their rivals, the Keen Colopy Group. Gun violence and intimidation were rife. As a teenager, April grew up surrounded by gangland culture, where settling scores with threats or worse was an accepted norm. Into this environment stepped Ger Dundon, one of the younger members of the infamous Dundon family, who were fast rising to dominance in Limerick's underworld. April met Gerard when she was only about 15 years old. She was drawn into his orbit at a formative age, finding romance with the baby-faced gangster at a time when most girls her age were still in school. The Dundon brothers, Wayne, John, and Gerard Dundon, along with their cousins in the McCarthy family, were at the center of Limerick's gang feud. In 2003, a rival gang boss named Kieran Keane was abducted and executed in Limerick. Ger Dundon, an older brother in the Dundon clan, and an associate, Anthony McCarthy, were later convicted of that killing, marking a decisive victory in the feud. April's father, Jimmy Collins, was an ally of the Dundons in those days, a local gang boss in his own right. He even made headlines during the feud's peak for posing in a photograph to show off his gangland tattoos, a display of allegiance to the cause. Under Jimmy's roof, April and her siblings grew up understanding that the family name carried weight, but it also carried risk. More than once, the Collins home itself became a target. Back in September 2010, at the height of the feud, Wayne Dundon, Ger's older brother, allegedly threatened April's family. In one incident, Wayne confronted April's mother, Alice Collins, warning he would kill her sons if the Collins family didn't fall in line. By her early 20s, April had become a young mother. She and Ger Dundon had 3 children together during their long relationship. Juggling motherhood and the role of a gangland girlfriend was no easy feat. Ger was frequently in trouble with the law. At one point, around 2010, Ger landed in prison. This put April in a precarious position. With Ger away, his brothers Wayne and John took a keen interest in controlling April's actions, especially regarding access to Ger's children. Tensions within the family began to boil over. April ended her relationship with Ger in spring 2010, but the split did not mean a clean break from the gang's influence. It only provoked the wrath of Ger's brothers. John Dundon, Ger's older brother, showed up at April's door one day in early April 2011, banging and shouting through the door. "I know you are in there, you tramp. I want to see my nephews. When I get you, I'm going to kill you." April cowered inside with her little ones as John threatened her life for defying the Dundon family by keeping the children away. That moment was a turning point. The years of loyalty she had given to the Dundons, standing by Ger through gang wars and court cases, had earned her no mercy. In May 2010, around the time her relationship with Ger was deteriorating, April made a fateful mistake that would later haunt her credibility. she participated in the intimidation of a witness in a trial involving members of the gang. The case in question was a major one at Limerick Circuit Court, where 8 men connected to organised crime were on trial. Among the accused were some of April's closest relations: her then partner Ger Dundon, her father Jimmy Collins, and one of her brothers. The lone prosecution witness, Mark Heffernan, was essential to the case. In a bid to undermine the trial, April targeted a relative of that key witness, essentially sending a message for Heffernan to back off. The incident unfolded in broad daylight. April, pushing one of her children in a pram, spotted the female relative of the witness on O'Connell Street in Limerick city centre and followed her into a Penny's department store. There, April confronted the woman. With others within earshot, April issued a chilling remark about the witness. "Wait till you see the beating she is going to get," she said loudly. It was a brazen threat, effectively promising violence against someone aiding the authorities. In 2011, the case was heard. April Collins, then 24 years old, pleaded guilty to the offence. She narrowly avoided jail, receiving a 3-year prison sentence, fully suspended, for the intimidation charge. This meant she would stay free as long as she stayed out of trouble. The judge's leniency may have been influenced by the fact April was a young mother, and perhaps by her guilty plea. But the conviction remained a black mark on her record, a fact that defense lawyers would later use to attack her credibility when she took the stand as a state witness. Following John Dundon's death threat at her door in April 2011, April decided to seek help. She went to the Gardaí and made an official complaint about the intimidation she was suffering. With her former in-laws now effectively hunting her, April thought that the only way out of this life was through the truth. In April 2011, roughly 2.5 years after witnessing a particular killing, she phoned Garda Hurahan and said she was ready to talk about those dark secrets. An appointment was set for April 20th, 2011. On that day, April Collins sat down with senior detectives and gave a detailed cautioned statement about a killing plot she had knowledge of. It was the shooting of an innocent man, rugby player Shane Geoghegan, who had been gunned down in a case of mistaken identity in November 2008. April's insider knowledge of that crime would prove to be a huge breakthrough for law enforcement. For over 2 years, Shane's investigation had hit dead ends and silence. Now, from the heart of the gang, a witness was finally talking. Yet, cooperating with Gardaí meant April was effectively signing her own death warrant in the eyes of the gang. She did so only after ensuring some measure of safety for her family. As she later testified, it was the relentless threats from John and Wayne Dundon that pushed her to make the statements. She made it clear that no one coerced her to turn informant. It was her own choice, born of fear and desperation. April had effectively switched sides in the Gangland saga. She was no longer April Collins, the gang mole. She was April Collins, the state witness, a prized asset in the fight to dismantle the McCarthy-Dundon mob. Shane was a 28-year-old rugby player, entirely innocent and uninvolved in crime, who was brutally shot dead near his home in the early hours of November 9th, 2008. His death sent shockwaves through Limerick and Ireland. Thousands attended his funeral in outrage and grief. But for years the question remained: who ordered the killing and why? Inside the tight-knit circle of the Dundon gang, April Collins knew exactly what had happened. In fact, she had been present on the night it was planned. According to April's testimony, she was at the house of Ger's brother, John Dundon, and his girlfriend, Ciara Killeen, just hours before Shane was gunned down. Also in that house were several figures who would later become infamous: Ciara's brother, Nathan Killeen, Liam Casey, and a newcomer to Limerick's underworld named Barry Doyle. In the sitting room of the Dundon house that night, April overheard a conversation. John Dundon was orchestrating a hit. He started talking about how he had sussed out John McNamara's whereabouts over the previous 2 days. John McNamara, nicknamed John Mac or Pitchfork, was a known associate of the rival Colopy family, and thus a target in the gang feud. John Dundon described McNamara's routine, the comings and goings, and gave a physical description of the target to Barry Doyle. According to April, John said he had a firearm ready in a car outside and that everything was sorted. It just needed to be done. Per John's plan, Nathan Killeen's role was to be the getaway driver in a stolen car, and Barry Doyle the hitman. April herself became part of the alibi arrangement. Ger Dundon asked her to book a hotel room for the night so they could establish an alibi away from the crime scene. She and Ger checked into the Strand Hilton Hotel in Limerick with their 2 young sons on the night of November 8th. She admitted in court that the booking was indeed to cover for Ger's whereabouts. While April and Ger put their children to bed in a hotel room, Barry Doyle and Nathan Killeen were out hunting John McNamara in the suburb of Doyle. They lay in wait near his girlfriend's house, armed and ready to kill. But in a cruel stroke of misidentification, when a man appeared on the dark street matching the general build of the target, Barry Doyle opened fire and shot him 5 times, only to discover afterward that he had killed the wrong person. The victim was Shane, who lived only a few doors away from the intended target. Unaware of the error that night, John Dundon initially thought his plan had succeeded. Early the next morning, April and Ger received a call. John Dundon wanted to see them immediately. April drove with Ger and their kids to meet John at Finnegan's pub car park around 6:30 a.m. In her statement, April described pulling up her car next to a vehicle where John Dundon and Barry Doyle sat waiting. John was brimming with excitement. He said that John Mac is dead. However, within moments, the mood soured. John started to panic. Information was filtering through that John McNamara was not actually dead. John roared and shouted at Doyle, livid that the meticulously planned assassination had misfired. Barry Doyle, in shock himself, protested, insisting he had followed John's plan and description. The realization had dawned that an innocent man was dead and their real target still alive. The defense in court later pressed her. Why hadn't she tipped off the Gardaí that a hit was about to occur? She answered candidly, I couldn't say that to the guards at the time. I'd be killed myself, and my family would have been killed. It would take years and a remarkable change of heart before April could bring this information to authorities. But in the immediate aftermath, she returned to daily life. The hitman, Barry Doyle, was arrested based on April's statement and eventually confessed during Garda interviews that he had shot Shane in a case of mistaken identity. In February 2012, Barry Doyle was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. However, Doyle's conviction alone wasn't enough. The authorities wanted the mastermind, John Dundon, who at that point was still on the streets. By mid-2012, the state felt confident enough to charge John Dundon with ordering the killing of Shane. Given the danger and the gang's history of witness intimidation, the trial was set for the non-jury Special Criminal Court in Dublin. April, along with a few other insiders who had flipped, including her own older sister, Lisa Collins, would be the prosecution's star witnesses. As the trial approached in 2013, the pressure on April was immense. She was by then a mother of 4, having had another child since splitting with Ger, and she was in extremely fragile health. In fact, in July 2013, just as the trial was about to commence, April was hospitalized with serious pregnancy complications and tragically suffered a miscarriage. Despite this personal heartbreak and physical toll, she insisted on proceeding with her testimony as soon as she was medically able. In July and August 2013, April Collins took the stand in Dublin's Special Criminal Court and told all. Facing her former brother-in-law John Dundon, the man, she said, is out to kill me. April recounted in granular detail the conspiracy to get rid of John McNamara and the killing of Shane. Her account did not stand alone. It was well corroborated by CCTV footage and mobile phone records, which helped confirm the movements and meetings she described. The judges later wrote that the evidence, taken as a whole, pointed overwhelmingly to the guilt of John Dundon. They outright rejected the defense's wild theory that April, her sister Lisa, and cousin Christopher had concocted an elaborate false story to frame John. The notion that these ordinary individuals could mastermind such a hoax, the court said, holds no water. After weeks of evidence, the Special Criminal Court judges delivered their verdict in August 2013. John Dundon was found guilty. He was sentenced to mandatory life imprisonment. For April Collins, it was a moment of profound relief and also of unavoidable notoriety. In gangland culture, nothing is more hated than a rat. As April was rebuilding her life under protection, the wheels of justice turned to another notorious case, the 2009 assassination of Roy Collins. Roy Collins, no relation to April's family despite the common surname, was a 35-year-old businessman in Limerick, gunned down on April 9th, 2009, outside his family's pub and amusement arcade at the Roxborough Shopping Centre. His killing was an act of pure vengeance by the gang, revenge for the stand his father, Steve Collins, had taken against them years prior. In 2004, Steve Collins had testified in court against Wayne Dundon. Wayne never forgave this. After getting out of prison, Wayne plotted revenge and Roy became the target.
The defiance of the Collins family was a running sore for the McCarthy-Dundon gang. Their gangland enemies watched and waited and came out of the shadows on the morning of April the 9th, 2009, Holy Thursday.
On that morning, it was like any other morning. Came in here, I was setting up the business in the pub and Roy went into the casino to set up the casino. About a half an hour later, I got a call from the barman to say somebody was bleeding next door in the casino. Went in and I seen Roy just in the corner, bent down on his hunkers and he couldn't breathe. He lifted himself up and I could see the bullet on the ground. I just couldn't believe what I was looking at. And he kept on repeating to me that he couldn't breathe, he couldn't get his breath. He just held on to me and he told me he loved me. He loved his mother.
Roy Collins lost his fight for life a few hours later. This was a salutary crime. The calculated murder of a young man related to a witness who had stood up to a crime boss. This was an attack on every citizen of the state.
He was murdered clearly to send a signal to the rest of the community in Limerick that if anybody came forward and gave evidence or helped the criminal trials, that they were going to be taken out as well.
By 2014, Wayne Dundon and Nathan Killeen were finally standing trial at the Special Criminal Court, charged with Roy Collins' killing. April Collins again stepped forward as a witness. In May 2014, amid high security at the court, April testified in the Roy Collins trial. April's evidence in this trial was somewhat tangential, but still significant. She recounted events on the day of Roy's killing that tied into the defendant's actions. The day Roy was shot, she was at the hospital with one of her young sons who was ill. While at the hospital, she received a call on her mobile phone around the time of the shooting. She did not explicitly identify the caller in open court, but it was implied that the voice on the other end was Wayne Dundon's. The prosecution wanted to use April's recognition of Wayne's voice as evidence, but the defense challenged this as hearsay or unreliable. April's evidence, along with other testimony and significant CCTV forensic evidence, helped secure convictions. In August 2014, the Special Criminal Court found Wayne Dundon and Nathan Killeen guilty of the killing of Roy Collins, sentencing both to life imprisonment. As of that verdict, The McCarthy-Dundon gang's top hierarchy was effectively decapitated. Wayne Dundon and John Dundon were lifers. Older brother Desi Dundon was already serving life since 2003. Key hitmen like Barry Doyle and Nathan Killeen were behind bars for life as well. It was an extraordinary takedown, and April Collins was key in achieving it. The Dundon brothers were jailed, but they still had loyalists and family on the outside. Roy's family had to be relocated and given new identities after his death, under witness protection. Roy's father said that Limerick's gangsters had destroyed his life and family, and he advocated for tougher measures for gang leaders. While Roy's family left Limerick for safety, April's family chose to remain in their hometown, albeit under guard. With the major trials behind her, April Collins began trying to rebuild her life. In 2017, she got married to Thomas O'Neill, the man who had stood by her side through the tumultuous years of witness duty. Tom O'Neill was a familiar face to those following Limerick crime. He infamously had a past as one of the Cratloe Woods convicted in a 2004 gang. April had begun a relationship with Tom O'Neill around 2012 to 2013 after her split from Ger Dundon. Despite Tom's violent past, which included a 10-year prison stint for the Cratloe Woods crime, April saw in him a partner who was outside the Dundon family's shadow. They wed in Limerick in February 2017 in a low-key ceremony. Notably, both bride and groom chose to adopt a new surname after marriage, Sheehy, which was Tom O'Neill's father's surname. This may have been a bid to shed the Collins name and possibly avoid easy recognition, though in practice, everyone still knew her story. Tom O'Neill might not have been a Dundon, but he was by no means a reformed character. After his release from prison in late 2012, Tom faced multiple legal scrapes. He had a long track record of violence and was known to have several enemies from feuds he got into behind bars and on the outside. By the 2020s, Thomas had fallen into the drug trade, becoming involved in Limerick's illicit narcotics scene. Garda intelligence pegged O'Neill as a low-level drug dealer. For a time, Tom and April seemed to keep a low profile, but trouble found them soon enough. In 2023, a nasty feud erupted in Limerick's south side. This feud would directly threaten April's household. Tom O'Neill had gotten into a dispute with some low-level younger gang members in the area. Those low-level dealers, however, were connected to something bigger. They were supplied by a faction controlled by Edward McCarthy, a relative of the Dundon brothers. This set the stage for a new tit-for-tat cycle of violence, eerily reminiscent of the bad old days of the Limerick Feud. In October 2023, a gunman opened fire at the home of April's father, peppering it with bullets. Thankfully, no one was injured. On social media, anonymous accounts appeared, spreading slanderous posts and unfounded allegations against members of the Collins family. Importantly, April's father, Jimmy Collins, who had once been aligned with the McCarthy-Dundons, was now clearly on the opposite side. But this time, he and his family were targets, not aggressors. Then, in November 2024, an unrelated event briefly took Thomas O'Neill out of the equation. He was jailed for 2 years for drug dealing after being caught red-handed by an armed Garda selling on the streets. In June 2023, detectives had observed Tom leaning into a car in Hyde Avenue dealing drugs. They moved in and found dozens of baggies in the vehicle and more at Tom's house. The judge jailed him for 2 years in late 2024. Thomas O'Neill's stint in prison did nothing to quell the dispute. If anything, it may have exacerbated it, as his absence left April's family potentially more vulnerable on the street. In April 2025, a gun and bomb attack had taken place outside April's home. The assailants tried to send a deadly message right to April's doorstep. CCTV footage captured a man hurling a lit pipe bomb into the back garden of April Collins's family home, which then exploded in a huge fireball. The video of the fireball underscored how real the threat to April's family was. The fact that some attacks were going unreported in the media until much later indicates how normalized such violence had become locally and how intimidated residents were. The Gardaí responded by launching major search operations against the feuding groups. A few days later, the Guards carried out 17 searches around Limerick, seizing over €235,000 worth of cash and goods, plus vehicles and drugs. This was an effort to disrupt the gang's finances and arsenal. Despite such efforts, the feud showed no immediate signs of ending. Online harassment campaigns are in full swing, with both sides' associates taunting each other with accusations of crimes or personal attacks on Facebook and other platforms. However, it's critical to note that April Collins herself has not been accused of any wrongdoing in this new feud. By all accounts, she has tried to live quietly, focusing on raising her children. It is her association by family, through her father and husband, that has dragged her back into danger. April Collins today is a far cry from the 15-year-old girl who fell in love with a gangster. She has been through the fire, surviving death threats, enduring public vilification by associates of the gang she testified against. As she once bitterly remarked in court, "I don't lead any charmed life. No one would like to lead the life I'm living." Those words ring truer than ever in 2025.